Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and of course, Archaven Comics. So, there's been a lot of talk about the blue wave. There's been a lot of talk about how Democrats are going to dominate the midterm elections, how they're going to take back the House and impeach the God Emperor. There's talk about how they're even going to take back the Senate and not only take back the House and the Senate, impeach the president and remove him from office. The fact of the matter is that this is not going to happen. There will be no blue wave in 2018. I have said this before. I fully expect to need to say it again. And just don't be surprised when the Democrats, again, significantly underperform the media's predictions. What I find a little bit tiresome is the same people who said that Trump couldn't get past 30% support in the Republican nomination. They said he couldn't win the Republican nomination. They said he couldn't possibly win the election. Now, if you recall, I predicted in around the time of I think it was after South Carolina, I said that Trump was going to win the election, or he was going to win the nomination, and he was going to win the election. Why? The polls didn't say that. But I don't really pay much attention to the polls because the polls are dishonest. The polls are actually Democratic weapons. The pollsters, for the most part, are Democratic activists. And yes, I see that some of you are commenting on my glorious shirt. You may recall I had a birthday recently, and there is a long and ongoing joke in the family about the meerkat, or the piranha of the Serengeti. I'm a firm believer that a core element of parenthood is lying to your children about the state of the world as much as possible. And so we went to the London Zoo some years ago, and I may have claimed that the leading cause of death in Africa is not elephants, as some think. It's not crocodiles, as some think, but it's actually meerkats, who of course are known as the piranha of the Serengeti and can turn a giraffe into a skeleton in under a minute. It's kind of remarkable. It's kind of remarkable what little kids will believe as long as you can keep a straight face. So anyhow, this was the result years later. Anyhow, so yeah, fear the meerkat. So to get back to, I realize there's at least one person watching this going, wait, meerkats are the leading cause of death in Africa. Anyhow, one of these days I'll write a book, How Not to Raise Your Children. Although I have to admit that, it's clearly I get it from my parents, because I think that I genuinely believe that the crust was the healthiest part of the bread until I was about 30. And Space Bunny said, honey, did you ever stop and think about how bread is made? I realized, that was just Mom's way of getting me to eat the crusts. So, anyhow, so if you look at what's actually happening, you can see that the media is relying on a false narrative. It's just created another false narrative. They cite these irrelevant and misleading facts. They talk about, well, the average midterm election sees the presidential party losing so many seats in Congress. But the problem is they're using both Democratic and Republican presidents as an example. If you use the average loss to the Republican Party, when the Republican Party holds the presidency, the average loss is only 11 seats. Well, the current Republican majority is 43 seats. So at most, if this was an average year, the Republicans would be expected to lose about 11 seats. They would have a majority of 32. That's not exactly losing the House. But beyond that, we're not in an ordinary situation. Donald Trump is currently enjoying the fastest growing economy since the 1980s. We're seeing economic growth of the sort that we just simply have not seen in decades. And so the unemployment rate is down, the GDP is up, and historically when that happens, the president does very, very well. Beyond that, we're also seeing the results of the Department of Justice finally beginning to look into some of the voter fraud that Democrats are incredibly dependent on. And beyond that, the Democrats' embrace of identity politics is finally beginning to bite them. We're seeing a accused Somali bigamist who's running virtually unopposed in Minnesota for Keith Ellison's old seat. We're seeing that young Puerto Rican woman in New York. These are, diversity candidates that are very hard left, that are completely unappealing to white Democrats across the country. White Democrats are gradually beginning to wake up to the fact that their party has no use for them, that their party actually hates them. And is definitely not going to govern in their interest. And so if you look at what they're trying to do, what they're trying to claim, it's very clear that their narrative is entirely false. In fact, it would not surprise me in the slightest if not only was there not a blue wave, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Republicans considerably overperformed again. Especially because we're starting to see the early indications of that. There's down in Texas, there was just a special election for Congress. It was a seat that's been held by Democrats for 139 years. And it went for Hillary by something like 20 points. It was 12 points. I think it's 12 points. And it just went Republican. Now, can you imagine what would happen, how the media would report it, if a seat that had been Republican for 139 years, that Donald Trump had won by 12 points, suddenly turned Democrat? We'd be hearing, oh, this is absolute proof, the blue wave is inevitable, and so forth. But the information that we actually have, the reliable information that we actually have, the actual evidence, is scanty. But what there is actually indicates that if there is a wave, it's going to be in the Republicans' favor. Especially when you look at the generic party identification, where the Democratic the Republican identification has actually increased by a point. The Democratic identification has fallen by 4 points. That's a 5-point swing right there. And so, when you look at the actual situation, instead of the fake polls and the fake news pushed by the SJW media, you immediately see that the situation is not at all what they think it is. It's not at all what they claim it to be. And so what people need to stop doing is stop paying attention to people who have reliably proved themselves to be unreliable. Why, I can't tell you how many people on the blog have been, I'm worried about this, I'm concerned about that. I mean, just knock it off. You're actually working towards making what you fear happen. Why are you needlessly, pointlessly, groundlessly demoralizing people when all the actual evidence is actually quite positive in the short-term political sense? Somebody points out, we were told down-ballot Republicans were going to all lose in 2016, and Trump would cause Republicans to lose Congress. Did that happen? No. The exact opposite happened. And the same thing is going to be true in 2018. Look, I've been predicting a Trump slide in 2020. There was not a Trump slide in 2016. Trump won, but it was relatively close. So how are we going to get from a narrow victory in 2016 to a Trump slide in 2020 with Democrats overperforming in 2018? We're not. It's not going to happen. But the Trump slide is going to happen. And so I think that it is very, very obvious that the media narrative is false. The Republican doomsayers are wrong again. I like Mike Cernovich. Mike's great. But, Mike's specialty is not this sort of analysis. Now we'll see. If the blue wave actually shows up and I'm wrong, I'll admit it. I will very publicly admit it, and I will attempt to analyze and understand what I got wrong. But I don't think that's the case. You may recall that I was consistent in telling people what was going to happen with Trump, and I was correct. You'll note that I was one of the first ones to be directly contradicting the media narrative and saying the blue wave is not going to happen. There's no such thing. It's false. And so here's the interesting thing. Here's another piece of evidence. The Houston Chronicle today ran a piece that was talking about the underperformance of the Democrats and the excuses that they're giving for the loss of that special election. And if you look at what they're saying, it's very, very clear that they are now laying the groundwork for the excuses that they're going to offer after the midterm elections in November. So they're already beginning to try to backtrack on their false narrative and their false predictions of the inevitable Democratic taking of the House. So, you just need to learn to stop taking the mainstream media seriously. Rather than looking at what they're actually saying, rather than look at the details that they're trying to push as fact, look at their motivations. Look at the pattern of what they're doing, especially the pattern of what they're doing and saying over time. Because when you look at that trend, when you look at how what they present as fact shifts, that tells you what they really believe. If you see the media, if you see the New York Times gradually moving away from the predictions of the blue wave, then you know that they don't believe it's going to happen. They try to make their predictions to influence people's thinking. They try to push their narrative early and push it hard in the hopes that they can make it come to pass. As soon as they realize it's not going to come to pass, they start backing off their predictions. Well, it's going to happen, but if this and this and that happen, then it might not be quite as inevitable as we believe it to be. By the time the election comes, they'll have backed off it entirely. So, somebody said Dustin Nemos exposes Cernovich's fake MAGA. No, that's not true. Mike is very sincere about his support for Trump and MAGA and so forth. You just have to realize that commentators are just like everybody else. They have emotions. They get upbeat over for irrational reasons. They get downbeat for irrational reasons, and so you just need to look at why they're saying what they're saying. I don't know. I haven't followed Mike's discussions on the blue wave closely enough to know why he thinks that's the case. But if you look at what I'm saying, you can see that the evidence that I'm citing is consistent with the predictions that I made several months ago. Look, if there had been the reverse, if there were strongly Republican areas that were actually genuinely voting Democrats into office, I would question my conclusions. But all the evidence we're seeing is in support of my hypothesis that there will be no blue wave and that Republicans are going to retain the House, retain the Senate, and probably overperform. Alabama went blue, though. So what? We know why. Roy Moore was a suboptimal candidate, and the combination of him being a suboptimal candidate, him being submarined by the establishment Republicans, and the media waging a very intense national campaign against him, those three factors were enough to sink him. Roy Moore could have, Roy Moore should have won that, and he could have won it if he had simply handled the situation better. But he didn't handle it very well. And when you don't, handle that kind of attack efficiently and effectively, it's gonna have a negative effect, and it did. Have you watched the JBP versus Sam Harris debate? It's pretty tedious. I have not, and that is exactly why. I never watch any Sam Harris debate. I read enough of them when I was writing The Irrational Atheist, and he inevitably does the same thing, which is say something, get called on it, deny that he meant what he said, and it's very boring. Why do you think Democrats are pushing to add jailbirds to the bottom feeder vote? Because jailbirds will vote for Democrats. Well, why else would they do it? That's also why they're pushing for, the most lax voting standards. That's why they're totally opposed to voter ID and all that sort of thing. They want as many possible opportunities for fraud as possible. Democrats require an amount of fraud in order to even compete effectively in probably 3/4 of the districts, or the House districts. Will the Democrats double down in the wake of a loss or boot the crazies? They will double down. They can't boot the crazies because the crazies are beginning to outnumber them. I mean, you know, it's not so much crazies, it's just the diversity candidates. You know, blacks are no longer willing to vote for liberal whites. You know, the Democrats are transforming into the official diversity party, and there will not be any place for whites, however liberal or socialist they might consider themselves to be. They're not wanted. They're not wanted in the Democratic Party any more than they're wanted in South Africa. Let's see. I was a volunteer for Roy Moore, and every third radio ad was anti-Roy Moore. I kid you not. Roy Moore also did drop the ball towards the end and didn't campaign the last few days. He got arrogant. You know, maybe he did. I don't know if he was arrogant or not, but he definitely was not effective. And I was not at all surprised that he lost. You know, you can't, you simply can't assume that things will take care of themselves. You always have to show up. You know, I mean, we lost our most recent soccer game. We actually scored the first goal 30 seconds into the game. We nearly scored another goal about a minute later. We completely controlled the game for the first 15 minutes and missed about 5 or 6 opportunities after that. Somehow, they had 2 opportunities, scored 2 goals. We went at halftime down 2-1. We couldn't get it back. We ended up losing 3-1. I think each of the 3 goals were mistakes on our part. We completely dominated the game, made 3 mistakes, lost 3-1. You've got to execute. It's not enough to be in the stronger position. You still have to execute. Candace Owens was pushing for felons to get the vote too. Unbelievable. It's not unbelievable at all. She's black. She supports her identity group. Black men are overly are overrepresented statistically in jail. They're overrepresented in terms of the population affected by losing the vote. It shouldn't surprise you at all. I mean, you have to understand, Candace Owens is a grifter. You know, she's not a conservative. There's nothing conservative about her. You know, she went seamlessly from, you know, being a left-wing activist to being a conservative poster girl. But, you know, she's just like, you know, she's just like the Herman Cain and what's his name, Ben Watson. You know, she's there to appeal to the Republican conservatives, and she's figured that out. She's profiting from it. Fine. You know, there's a market for, you know, wherever there's a demand, the supply is going to show up. And, you know, there is always a market in the Republican Party for a black individual to publicly espouse a few conservative positions and immediately get embraced as some sort of figure of note. It's totally irrelevant in political terms, but, you know, this is a pattern we see every single election. I mean, frankly, I don't know how old she is, but it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if, you know, people, you know, you can totally see all the Republican cucks running around going, I would love to vote for a black woman like Candace Owens. You know, I mean, I've been hearing that line since the same type of people were waxing enthusiastic about how much they would love to vote for Alan Keyes. You know, he was a total disaster as a candidate for the Chicago Senate. Ben Carson, yeah, not Ben Watson. Ben Watson is a tight end. Let's see. Yeah, Michael Steele. Yeah, Michael Steele was possibly the worst of all of them. Somebody said, wherever there's demand, like gamer girls on Twitch. Exactly. You know, there's always going to be people who are there to take advantage of what people want to believe. And, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. You just have to recognize it when you see it. Let's see here. I asked about Alt Hero number 5. Any updates? Let's see. I finished the script. I think we've got, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 pages done. They're already colored. And so I would guess it'll probably be out in about 3 weeks. We're also working on Alt Hero number 6 right now. And of course on Alt Hero Q, since even though the campaign is still ongoing. Note, the Alt Hero campaign is still ongoing. If you haven't backed it yet, I would strongly encourage you to do so. In fact, let me see if I can pop the cover up here just so you guys can see that. But we're definitely making progress. We're definitely moving forward. Here we go. Why is that so small? I don't like that one. We'll get rid of that one. Let's find a better one here. Okay, that should work. Yeah, so here's the Alt Hero Q cover. And if you haven't backed it yet, I would strongly encourage you to do so, because this is right now the big front in the cultural war. Yeah, we've got movie studios and production people who are approaching us about this stuff. Fans who are reading it have been commenting on how they'll make for fantastic movies and so forth. And frankly, I think Alt Hero Q is going to be the best thing that we've done so far. We've got a great team. The story that Chuck Dixon is writing is the best that I've seen him write yet. And so I think that I don't think that you're going to regret it. Even if you just want to back it for get the digital editions for $25, I think you'll be very happy with it. Any plans to offer print subscriptions for comic series? Not yet. We're looking into how to do that, but we're going to have to wait. We need to make some progress with how we're handling distribution before we do that. I want the Throne of Bones audiobook. Is that really a thing? Yes, it is. I believe it's about 2/3 recorded now. You can actually hear the guy who's reading it. He first did the test by doing The Last Witch King. He's a wonderful voice, great British accent, and absolutely perfect for Throne of Bones. It's going to be, if I recall correctly, it's going to be something like 40 hours. So it's going to be a massive, massive audiobook. Can you imagine how ridiculously well received right-wing Jason Bourne style movies will be? Oh, I mean, Alt Hero Q, if it is ever made into a movie, I would predict that it will do more than 500 million at the box office. And I realize that sounds crazy. We've never made a movie before. But the story thus far is that good. I mean, think about it. When have I ever said that? Never said that about Alt Hero. I've never said that about Quantum Mortis. You know, I've never even said that about Avalon. You know, those are all really good stories. But when I read the first 5 pages of Alt Hero, and you can read the first 2 pages already. We've actually got the first 5 pages all illustrated, colored, and even lettered. And I put the first page up yesterday, the second page today. Tomorrow I'll put up the 3rd page. But I can tell you that by the time I got to the 5th page and I read that last line, I was just blown away. Can we use PayPal on Indiegogo? I have no idea. So you know, you'll have to check it out. I mean, just go to Indiegogo and find out what they take. I just don't know. Does it really matter where we buy from? I usually buy from Castalia, but it seems like the Amazon numbers are important. We don't care very much about the Amazon numbers. Those are mostly based on Kindle Unlimited anyhow, which we don't really make any money from. We vastly prefer you to buy from Castalia Direct, Archaven Direct, Dark Legion Direct. It's better for us. It's better for you. It's faster, and we're going to be offering some better service there soon. It's something that we're working on with them. What studio would be brave enough to make that movie, considering Hollywood is a big part of the swamp? Well, there are new studios being formed all the time. I promise if there's any Alt Hero movie, I swear that I will see it 5 times. Look, don't be surprised if there are. We're already talking to people very seriously about this stuff, and there's multiple options on the for this. So, I watched Mission Impossible 2018 the other day and realized that Tom Cruise is the bad guy. It's funny. Let's see here. The movie production would have to happen outside Hollywood, right? Isn't the industry all rotten? I think that most of it is, but not all of it is. And the main thing is that if you're able, it's the money that tends to cause the trouble. You know, it's the old golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. So if you take funding from rotten people, you get rotten results. But we're not going to do that. We wouldn't do that. So, perhaps Alex Jones production. Yeah, I don't think they have the wherewithal for that. Okay, I'm only seeing debit and credit as enough. Yeah, I guess it doesn't take PayPal then. I don't know. I'm sorry. But yeah, you know, you need to keep in mind that you know, I live in Europe, and we're by no means tied to Hollywood or anything. I actually was really impressed, I mean, to the point that I was actually kind of curious about working with those folks. Sky did a series called Stan Lee's Lucky Man. I think we just finished the 3rd series, and it's really good. You know, I mean, it's not a big budget production by any means, but it's really effective. So, are you going to be back on InfoWars anytime soon? I have no idea. I actually just exchanged email with them today, but it wasn't about appearing there. So, but I mean, honestly, that's really not my thing. You know, I'm learning to do video. You know, we've got a new Voxiversity that's in the works. The second part of the Christianity and Western civilization. But you know, full respect to InfoWars and Alex and the team there, but that's not my focus. You know, I have no desire to spend my time going on to television shows and talking. I would frankly prefer this environment. You know, I don't like the mainstream media, the cable news environment where everything has to be very limited and consists of short, unrelated sound bites. It's not my medium. So let's see. Anyhow, that's all I've got tonight. So if you haven't backed Alt Hero Q yet, I'd encourage you to at least go check out the campaign. There's also the Ember War campaign, Richard Fox, military science fiction, good stuff. Just so you understand, this is how we make a difference in the culture war. This is how to do it. If you're frustrated by the stuff that you see, if you want different stuff to be out there, you need to be supporting these things. Because we can't win the cultural war by constantly playing defense. We can't win anything by sitting around whining and crying and complaining that the left, that our enemies, don't do things we like. Of course they don't do things we like. Of course they do things to upset and offend us. That's what they do. That's their purpose. And so when there are things that are being done, and I'm not saying that you should just blindly support anything. I was around for the Christian rock of the 1980s, and it was terrible. So but I don't think that you can look at what we've produced. We've produced over 30 digital and print editions, and I don't think that you can claim that any of them are bad or subpar or mediocre. They may not be at the top of the top of the heap yet, although I think with Alt Hero Q we're getting up there. But the point is that when you see stuff that you want to see more of, then you need to get behind it and help make it happen. And I really appreciate that so many of you do that. But the fact of the matter is, we're still short of 1,000 backers, whereas Alt Hero had, 2,200? So, we can do better. We can and we should do better. And we will. We will get there. Is there any plans for a Q expansion for the Alt Hero RPG? Well, there's certainly no plans for it, but that's probably a good idea. I'll have to talk to the designer and let him know about that. So, probably, to be honest, I think that would be it probably wouldn't be the core game. It doesn't have to be the core game, but it would probably be a separate module. That would probably be the best way to do it. So, anyhow, well, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, don't get down, don't get depressed about the media's false narrative. It's fake news. It is not a legitimate prediction. There will be no blue wave in 2018. Have a good evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream.